So, concluding this year's intersection, we have this dynamic Swedish duo from IRM, or Information Resource Management. IRM is known for their expertise within business architecture, and these are superstar mappers. They really want to teach organizations how to learn better. Learning, as we've heard several times today and yesterday, is a critical ability when adapting to an environment consisting of constant change. Because what is change without learning, right? That can be quite useless. Milky Way is a navigational tool for this journey, and Cecilia and Annika are here to tell us absolutely all about it. So please give them a warm welcome, Cecilia and Annika.
So my name is Cecilia and this is Annika, and we're going to talk to you about the Milky Way. We're talking about a true anchor model. That means that we can actually combine different kinds of knowledge and make sense of them. And we're going to show that this way of doing it is actually creating a true anchor model. So execution is the only strategy that the consumer sees, right? We have all these great ideas about what we want to accomplish, but we have an inertia within our enterprises of getting that to happen, or they even wonder why we're doing this at all. So if we don't get those great ideas into be accepted by the guys and girls working in our enterprise, they're just going to be that, great ideas. And that's not going to create any outcome. But going back to basics, sort of, models, and why do we have them? So first of all, they're just a simplification. They're not a true representation of the world, even though we might think that, because we do get a lot of benefits from them. But they're there to simplify things, right? And another thing they help us do is to think. If I'm supposed to redesign my kitchen, it's easier if I do a drawing of how I want this kitchen to look like, rather than trying to keep in my head that, okay, there goes the fridge, and 60 centimeters to the left, there's going to be the sink, etc. And especially if I want to share this with my family, that's going to be easier as well to communicate, right? And I don't make the mistake of thinking that that would work for my neighbor's kitchen, because it's right there where I am. So, given that they help us think, it leads to that we actually live in a world of models. So within enterprise architecture, we mainly work with business model canvases, process charts, information models, and application charts. But there are so many other models out there that the enterprise is dependent upon. But the question is just, how would I sort of relate to all of these? Where do I find them? They're somewhere on the internet, or I don't know, hopefully in some wiki. And what's up to date, right? And how are they connected? So this is me, and so I might get, this is the new business plan, or this is what we're going to be focusing on for the coming up year. That's usually coming in a text that I'm supposed to make sense of. And I might be in charge of a group, and I need to figure out the budget within this group. Then I use Excel. It's a good tool for that. There's a few projects ongoing as well at the enterprise, and I need to know how far they've come along and who's going to join from my group. And someone's came up with this new process chart. What do you think of that? Is that going to fit in? And we're thinking of maybe doing a new organization, or restructuring it. Is this a good idea? And then also someone from the IT department comes to talk to me about if I have any ideas about what I think of this, which more resembles a spaghetti diagram than anything else to me, and if what do I want to do with this, right? And this is my world. I need to navigate between all these aspects. And since we can't carry all those models around in our heads, we have to make mental models and try to understand how they actually connect with one another. So if I read some financial report, or I focus more on the processes within one area, or I work with that team, I've puzzled together how the enterprise is connected in my head. And that's going to be different to someone else. So here's someone saying something, and what are we really talking about? That's going to probably affect our processes, or that doesn't go with the strategic initiative that we just received, or that's going to not go with the projects we have ongoing, or we have to have a new department or whatever in order to fix this. And it's good that we think from different perspectives. That's what this conference is all about. But if we don't even know what we're talking about, that could be a problem. So, are there any aspects of human endeavor where we have like one model we start from? There's this guy now saying, I come from Fiumicino, outside of Rome in Italy. And it's not like any of the people in there get any of these pictures in their minds, right? Which planet are we on? Rather, everyone starts from one and the same model. The map of Europe, right? And from the information given, at least, I can say that we can rule out most of the map, right? It's not going to be in the north. Because we heard Italy. So I can zoom into there, and if I know something about Italy, I probably know where Rome is. And then I can, if I even have friends maybe, and I've gone to visit them, I might have a map like this in my head about what Fiumicino is like. So, but independent of my level of detailed knowledge, we all start from one and the same map, at least. So what are the benefits of a map? Have you thought of that, really? Because it's like we've all learned geography. And when you start to think of it, it's like, of course, it's great with a map. But why? What's the great things about a map? Well, first of all, we've decided on what different symbols mean, and we've also decided what north is, which gives us the same direction on every map, right? So, I don't know if you can see it, but this is a map of Sweden, and the region furthest to the south is Skåne. And whatever map of Sweden I look on, Skåne is going to be right there. It's not going to jump around. It's not like if I want to find myself on a process chart, I might be in the second process on the highest level, and then I zoom in there, and all of a sudden I'm in the third or fourth, zoom in even further, and I might be in 3 or 4 of them, right? It's always in one place. And it comes in different scales, which makes it possible for us to zoom in, zoom out, see more or see less detail. Even though my hometown, Skövde, is not going to be found in the world map, I know that if I would zoom into that area, I would find it. You know? It's also a fairly stable representation of the world. The more detail we go into, of course, things are happening. But overall, the continents aren't going to change that much. It also contains very different kinds of information in one and the same picture. I don't have to go to one map to look at topography, a second one to check out where the roads are, and a third one to check out where the cities are. They're all superimposed on top of one another, which creates greater meaning. So rather than having to go and look at just process charts or just information models or just application models, it tells me more if I actually combine that kind of information. We also do educate. Everyone's had geography lessons, right? Did anyone miss that? No? It's curriculum all over the world, right? Which leads to that we all share this view. Unless you're a flat earther. And since it's a stable representation of the world, this leads to that we can overlay it with other more rapidly changing information. Like, how am I going to navigate between these two cities? That's going to change depending on when I do my search, right? But it's far easier for me to navigate by looking at that than trying to hear something spoken, take the first road to the left, then to the right. Maybe you like those in cars, I don't. Or have you tried to listen to the weather forecast on radio? Do you have those? Anyone? You have them? Are they easy to understand? Or are they easier when you see the map? You strictly go, you know what you can rule out and what's important for you. And they're also their map is a very typical anchor model, because we know how far, for instance, the Roman Empire went once. We can see that in our heads. Or where do most people believe in Hinduism? We can map that on top, right? And that makes it easier for us to remember things when we can anchor that onto something else. So, would it be possible to create something that we can actually call a map with these kinds of benefits to it, instead of calling all our models for maps? So, if we could start by identifying and visualizing our value flow. So, what does an enterprise do over and over again? So, we start with an idea, and we maybe start to produce something. Then we market that. We make negotiations, we deliver. Oops, wrong button. We receive payments, and we do follow-up. And we do this over and over and over again. So we try to find natural steps within that value flow. Here we have an example of a training company that should do courses. So they start off their value flow with a planning phase. What are the market looking for? Is there any course we need to redesign, etc.? And then they productify these. They do market and sales, deliver courses, and follow up. And you see that we have lines going out between these steps in the value flow. So by doing that, we've created sectors on this area. That's like, at least we found the continents. Then we start to look at what's actually happening within each of these sectors, just a rough sort of, so we got an idea about, is this the right order? So we might do portfolio planning. What's happening in Productify? Well, we actually don't have our own teachers, so we need to contract those and introduce them. And of course, we have to design the courses. What's happening within marketing and sales? Well, marketing, campaigns, sales, but also payment management. And what's happening within delivery courses? Well, we also do student support. We, of course, deliver our lessons, course administration, and follow-up. But before we start over again, we also have strategic planning. That means we might want to review what we've done and make it better, right? So this gives us a rough idea about what the sectors contain, what's going on within them. And from that, we can start to find out who do we need to talk to within the enterprise. And we divide these more into what's done. And at the same time, as we ask people, what are you doing? We also ask them, what IT support systems or applications are you using while you're doing this? And what information are you handling? What do you need? And what's your output? What benefits do you bring to the rest of your team or to the rest of the organization? Who's using what you've produced? So this is what it could look like. This is an example, a training one. We'll show you how it could look like. But the result is actually that you have a map containing both processes, information, and IT systems in one and the same map. Yeah, so the question was, but so what? How does that help me in this situation, right? That's what we wanted to know. So now we're going to come to the interesting part, what you can use this foundation for.
Exactly. So what Cecilia took you through was like the basic idea of how we would design this map and how we would use this, what we call the business geography, the fact that you can place things in the map and that has a very specific meaning. Sorry, this one. And just to make sure that you get that we work in really complex areas, this is a chart. It's not meant for you to understand. It's more to get the idea of complexity that we would deal with in the type of assignment that we work with. So many pieces and so many dependencies and so many different things. And when you go to the different specific people in each area, they would say, oh, this is such an overview. Oh my goodness, you missed everything. But for navigation purposes and for shared knowledge and shared understanding of what are the different pieces that we have and how are they kind of connected, this is a good start. But what we found is that a map like this is interesting for a while. It's like when you go into a new place, which to kind of check it out. But after a while, you start, you would have to kind of solve a problem or a question with a map. So one of the first things that we would do when we do this type of mapping together with clients is that we would really fast design one of the first versions of the map, and then we would project a perspective on the map. And one of the most tangible ones are the product portfolio. What are you doing? What type of change portfolio do you have? Where do you have your major projects? And this is actually from a client that we have been working with for like 4 weeks. And we said, okay, let's try the product portfolio and see what we see. And I mean, literally, they were starting to laugh or glitter, it was kind of embarrassing because what they saw is that now we understand why none of the products are delivering. They are addressing the same capability areas, the same areas of the business, but they were not able to see that because the projects came from different directions. Could be like project portfolio things with the product portfolio that you wanted to change in the customer delivery, customer relationship. Or it could be something that had to do with internal processes, a new ERP system or a new CRM system or whatever. But they kind of merge into the same sector of this company's map. So what happened was that the management were like, they got this picture and it's like, oh my God, we cannot do this. Why are we doing this? They stopped 7, I think, of the projects ongoing and then kept 2 and they started to deliver. And I was like, yeah, well, you can stick around for longer if you want. And we did. And the other thing that you can do when you start to have those kind of maps is you can start to say, okay, what is actually working well and what is not working well. You can see that there is some red areas and there should be green. It looks better on the screen that we have. Some green areas where everything works fine, and there are some areas that are either yellow or red. And here you come to something that is really interesting with these type of maps, because they engage people in communication and discussions. Why is my area red? Who put my area red on this chart? And you can start to discuss. My area is green, and you can sort of describe what great things you're doing in your area. And by having those types of conversations, you would enrich the knowledge of how things work and why there are maybe some dependencies between these areas that you were not aware of. Still, I'd say we are in a pretty known area for us being enterprise and business architects. Heat maps and project portfolios are like what we've been struggling with for a very long time. So we were also able to do like roadmaps. So this is the idea of what are the strategies we have going forwards and what would be the order in which we would address these different areas. And then we could put on what would be the idea of the change portfolio that we would like to address. Anyway, I think most of us have been working in these type of areas. What struck us after a while we have been doing this is people came from marketing and other more customer-facing areas and service design and so on, and they were like, can you help us? Is there a way of understanding how the customer journey would interact with this map or this organization? And yes, there is. We can use the geography again and plot the customer journey outside the Milky Way and see, okay, which part of the main things that we do are addressing different parts in the customer journey. And then you can start having discussions. What touch points are supported by which capabilities or which areas or which groups in the organization? How well are they working? And to me, this has been a very helpful thing. I don't know how many of you who have done service blueprints. And my part, like the legacy system and all the behind the curtain kind of stuff, it's always so neatly put down at the lowest level. And it's like, it's never that neat. It's a lot more messy than it is. But this was a way of combining these two dimensions and also to some extent hiding some of the complexity that the customer journey people actually doesn't have to know. So we can, if we have, like what we've been doing a lot too, is work with services. So each capability would offer a number of services, and you can just expose them to the customer journey people and the service design people and say, these are things that we can easily provide for you in your innovation work. If you want something else, it's going to take longer. So it could be constrained in design kind of thing. And this is, again, what type of conversations can we engage in order to understand the different perspectives? And this trying to get the outside and in perspective and still not kind of missing the internal complexity of a large organization. And actually what we started to see that we could talk about the front stage and backstage notion. So we would like to make the customers participate in a great show or a number of great moments. But on the other hand, we also need to understand how can we as an organization sustainably deliver this over time. And we often, most of the time, not delivering this experience by ourselves. We are probably using a number of suppliers. So if you let's switch around and look at the backside of this, how can we interact with the suppliers in a more service kind of way and figure out what would a good service or supplier journey look like. And sometimes the suppliers are people that you would press for price and be really not so nice to. And sometimes the suppliers are an essential part of your service delivery, and you really need to make sure that they like to be suppliers in your network. And the same goes for how you can understand how these different touch points are supporting whatever service we would like to deliver or would like to purchase from these organizations. And when you get into these type of discussions, again, the question of organization, which is kind of a topic that architects have been kind of, no, we don't do organization. Well, totally, we don't agree at all. You need to understand where in the logic of hierarchy and financing and everything are the different areas located. Who is the boss? Who decides? How do we finance all of these things? So a way of mapping the organization onto a chart like this is really, really useful. And sometimes really revealing, because sometimes you realize that there is one person actually in charge of almost half of the organization. But when you look at the chart, the hierarchical, the normal organization chart, it doesn't show. But when you do something like this, you can see how they all are connected. And there is also a lot to do with how can we minimize the complexity within each part of the organization, depending on how large you are. For instance, if you operate in a number of markets, you might want to divide the marketing and sales area into geography. but you might want to do something else with the delivery organization. Maybe you have very different types of delivery depending on what type of products or services you have, so you want to split that part of the organization in another way. So that's another way of using a map like this to understand and also to try out what would a good organizational design be. And again, conversations. How can we engage with conversations to create this shared knowledge and understanding of what is actually in play in our network? And organizations, sometimes that turns into silos. We've heard of them, we've seen them in several of the presentations. And what we actually want to be able to do is to make sure that whatever value flow that we have identified is delivered in as good way for our customers and for our internal organization as possible. And here is an interesting conflict. I don't know if you met the silo and value flow conflict. We certainly have. So a way of just starting to have these type of discussions would be, can we set up or draw how a specific service stream, value stream would take its way throughout the entire network of all these capabilities throughout our organization. And depending on what type of company you are, either you have a very strong silo or organizational functional way of thinking, or you might be lucky, you might be on the other side where you would have a really strong value flow. Because the only way an organization actually makes money and is kind of valid for the market is that these value streams are actually delivering the value that our customers want to have, that suppliers want to be part of, and that our own internal network is able to carry in terms of how we work and how we kind of enjoy our experience in the organization. So here's another version of how we can engage in a number of other types of dialogues around how do we balance between the silos or the organizational parts and the value flows. And this, when we do this with clients, it's so revealing because most of the cases, I'd say the silos are the strongest. And then you would have like really enthusiastic product managers, product owners, or value stream owners even, that try to work within this system, but they need to negotiate with all the different silos, and that is really a tough way of trying to come up with a faster way of delivering new products and services. So this is a challenge that I think we meet in all the organizations that we work with. How do you balance between these two perspectives? And our answer is, again, the first thing is to see, and then you start to discuss and you decide what's important, how can we improve this, and how can we come up, sort of find the important handshakes in order to make this faster. And of course, it's not only one value stream, there are a number of them. And one of the things that we are noticing with all this, the increase in product development and the rapid new introduction of new services is that it's just going to be more and more and more and more. So we need to find a way of balancing this. And there is a lot of thinking that goes around how can we find good roles around the value streams and the owners of them compares to the different parts of the organization or the silos, if you like. Because there is a time dimension as well. Because most of the businesses have some kind of business planning that at least most of them do from a functional perspective. So you would have, what do we want to do in planning during this year or during this time period? How do we do that? And then each sector or each silo or each function area would work with these things. And they have their own idea, and even though they think that they have good conversations, my experience is that sometimes they're not really in line with each other and kind of move in different directions. And the same thing happens in the value stream dimension, because the value stream would deliver a product or a service, and you would introduce a product or a service through a life cycle. First you start with something small, maybe you don't know if this is going to work, and then you would go into more growth, hopefully, and mature, and then the last stage would be where we would decline, the product declines and you're supposed to replace it with something else. And there are so many different things going on in these different phases that really affects how you would like the organization to work. So if we look at this, just these two value streams, they are probably, they are in different stages. So the blue one would be maybe more manual, maybe more experimental. You don't really know. There's no idea writing all these routines and rules and everything because we don't really know. But the green one, here we can do a lot around automation, and all these things. So we need to kind of balance all of these discussions. And what we do is we try to do a really large picture. What is actually in play? We have the internal ecosystem with all the internal capabilities. We have the external ecosystem with all of these external people and external organizations that we interact with. And we have the product and service ecosystem. And this is another way of trying to understand how are we balanced throughout our entire network as a company. And given this, and given the information, the things that we see when we do this, there's a lot of redesigning that we need to do. So I'm just going to really take you through three of the different types of redesigning we have done. This has to do with how we can work with different roles and responsibilities at one company. And we can see when we map the roles that they're sketched, we saw that these have a heavy overlap between the yellow and the green, and the red were not even on the chart. I'm not going to go through it, but we could see missing links by just drawing things. Here they had KPIs on the arrows and no KPIs whatsoever. They didn't even know that they existed about the dotted arrows. And he already spoke a bit about how we can define the different roles between the functional areas and the value streams. And the last one is something that I'm actually working on now. There is 2 different organizations that is going to join. So we're trying to figure out how can we do this in a good way. So there are different teams in the organization that I work with that have the colored squares. And then we try to map the other organization's way of thinking in domains into this. It's not like we have the answer, but we can have a really interesting conversation of what would be a good thing to do and what would be a less good thing to do. So what we have here in the Milky Way is something that we would call the true anchor model. We can, when we find the basis correct with the business geography and all the capabilities, we have something that we can map a number of different perspectives and ask questions on, and the base model would remain the same. So just shortly coming back to Cecilia, remember her in the beginning. What if we could have a map like this describing what are the areas that we're focusing on? How much money are we spending on the different areas? Is that really relevant to how we are prioritizing in the business plan? And the portfolio, what type of product changes are we actually introducing? And the roadmap. And are we actually supporting the value streams in the West Wave with this new process? And of course, how would the new organization that is proposed affect the current situation? And the last one, it's not a spaghetti diagram. We can get it really neatly. It's a structure in there, don't worry. So the essence is, yeah, you can have that feeling instead of the one that you had in the beginning. And what drives us is what you see is all there is. So if we cannot make it visible and tangible, it's going to be very, very hard to talk about. And that is what the Milky Way is all about. What you see is all there is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Last round of questions and feedback.
Thank you to both of you. So what are some of the challenges you have had in doing this type of mapping?
Well, one of the largest maps challenges, I'd say, is it's never been done like this before. What is this? This is not best practice. So that has been a really hurdle. But once you get started, it's really intuitive when you work with people and in an organization, and they they get it. But since it's a new way of kind of wrapping everything around, and I think a lot of the things that you, Alex, talked about are in here. We have used so many of your techniques to create those maps and the ideas of if we would go into more detail. So all of these, decomposed microservices, everything that will be good architecture, event-driven, blah, 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 is in there. But we're not mentioning that much. We focus more on this shared idea of how could this be our shared mental model in order to have a really good conversations on more challenging topics.
And I would like to add that it's very, very powerful, but because it actually shows where you have your problems.
Yeah.
And if the organization is not ready for that, it's going to be tough. So if you're a lean organization where you constantly look for how to improve, this is going to go hand in hand. But if you're like, la 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 la, we don't have any problems, don't try this.
Well, you're gonna get a result, but they're not gonna like it.
Or they're going to hang the one who carried the message.
Yeah.
You know?
So in what context did you do this work? Was it a project? Was it within an IT field, or this is in a more of a business transformation context?
The talk was about the mapping, so it's more about how you can combine and how there is actually techniques to do this. But in the way that we've been working with our clients, it's usually we start at fairly large organizations with an architectural function, and they need help. They usually call us when there's too much, too slow product development, or too expensive, or too fussy, or when they're going to start something. But we do not run through all of these things at the same time. We start with a map, and then you would slowly take them through the entire process of having all these maps, because it's not the idea of having the correct map. It's the idea of having the correct discussions and dialogues and get everybody on the same page so that we can together make better decisions and eventually design better organizations for better customer experiences.
Yeah.
So it's a long way of.
But we've done this work now for 5 years, and we see that it becomes very stable over time. And I think we're up to that we could start talking to the board and saying, would you like to make these kinds of analysis? Would you like to see it in this way, to be able to connect all these different areas? Because if you come like an architect with a process or an information model or whatever, it can be pretty hard to get someone higher up the hierarchy to understand the value of it. But if you can actually connect it to a map of, like, listen, here, it's a blockage, right? This is why this is important. This is why we need to do this here, etc. You get more power on to doing it, and you get, like the anchor there, you get people to talk about, come together, like an intersection, right?
Yeah.
And try to solve the problem.
Thanks. I have one question. What would you say is let's say, if you have some kind of an MVP approach to that, what would be the smallest thing you can do to actually get started as a company? So what would you introduce if somebody says, like, okay, let's give it a try, but we don't want to put a lot of money on that?
Yeah, a lot of people are very tired of workshops, right? And they cost a lot, right? You have like 10 people in a room for 2 to 3 hours, and you're doing that 7 or 8 times just to cover something. So what's very interesting here is that you can actually do this very rapidly with just short interviews. So go to someone, take someone by the hand who knows it pretty well. Start somewhere in the beginning where it's sort of fluffy and people are just using Excel to figure out stuff in the beginning. And then, okay, so what are you doing? And then just place that name on it. Don't start calling it capabilities and that, because people will go, oh, no, we're not using that. You know, what are you doing? Just ask that, and then go for, okay, so what IT systems are you doing in it? And what information are you handling? And that takes like 20 minutes. You go back, you sketch it out, you show them the picture. Is that what we were talking about? Get an acceptance? And, oh, no, you have to, there's that and that going on as well. So you correct, go back again, and then you follow. Who are you leaving it off to? And so it becomes really quick. You can do this in 3 to 4 months.
All right, thanks.
Yes, so I just really want to give some feedback. I really love this talk. Again, the model, I think it should be taught in business schools, so you don't have to convince
We're trying.
convince the managers to use it. And yeah, so I'm wowed, and I think this is of such a big importance, and everything in your presentation kind of resonates and clicks. And one of the questions, a similar question I had earlier is again the question of how to implement it in the culture, how to make this like the standard best practice thing. Maybe you can share one or two things you do to facilitate that.
Yeah. One of the things that we learned really early on, and kind of based on traditional architecture as well, the way you work, is you need to be able to show value really fast. Because otherwise it's just going to be another modeling thing, and we don't want to do that. So the thing of trying to, as Cecilia said, get the first sort of geography, get the first areas where you would find the different capabilities or the different things you do, and then apply a perspective. As I said in the presentation, the easiest one would be the product portfolio. Everybody, or almost everybody, have a product PMO, or at least a list of the strategic initiatives going on, and that could be something just to make sure, are we addressing the same areas? Are we having any issues? Could this be a better way of prioritizing? Or maybe finding in how things could kind of be combined in a better way in the work with the change. And then keep on delivering value throughout this entire sort of the way you evolve all these questions, because you cannot start by asking these very complex questions in the very beginning, even though you might know already that they have them. But I think over the years we have been braver and braver in terms of adding these perspectives faster and faster. So I think that in the example that we had, we tried to do both customer journeys and the value streams for the different services of this organization. And that also sparked an interest and kind of made the map and this way of thinking and this shared idea of the mental model of this organization, it was spread to more people than usually and faster. But always remember, you need to answer a critical question, otherwise it's just, I don't know, it could be fun to do some modeling, but you're not going to be able to do that for long. So that's...
So the tools to be used, so a lot of people do use Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
And Visio can be easily part of that, so we're not believing in locking it somewhere in architectural. Okay, it's 5 people who can go in there and look at it, you know. Keep it open, so that way that you could spread it, and then also connect a wiki to it.
Yeah.
Because if you're really good at finding the borders and looking at the information that flows from one to the other, and really start to look at the events, the business events that's taken place within that capability, you can follow that all the way down to the IT service that needs to be taken place. So what goes on within the capability can be left within the capability, sort of. A little bit of black box thinking, but still, when you send something out, that needs to be corrected. So whatever goes on, whatever you need to control within your business capability, you can keep that in the wiki.
Yeah. And we really resonated with Philip's talk earlier about all the tools. Because when you start using a tool like this, your mental model change into a more shared understanding, instead of all these layers or I'm the application person, I only see things in application maps, and I'm the information, you know, I guess.
Lean IX also works very well.
Yeah. So,
Any final remarks? You get the last word.
I think it's really great. One of the big problems with models typically would be to get a buy-in to the models, that they actually have an impact. What I really like about this is that no matter what type of model or view you're looking at, there's a sense of togetherness in it. You can see basically that you're all together in making this happen. So even if something is green, as you said, Annika, if the following is red, then together we have a problem.
exactly.
My question, when you reference the best practices, is, do you see any type of situation where you would have people in certain parts of the organization that would not love to see this model. I mean, what are the data modelers and the application portfolio managers saying?
Well, that comes back to having a conversation of what we're trying to achieve with this map. I'm not saying that we would replace information models, or maybe we could replace application charts, because you could put them in here. But information models are still valid because you would have a specific type of domain within a capability that you would need to understand, because that's, in essence, business rules. So you need to be more specific. So I think it's more of finding the correct level of what you would model, and finding the borders between the different areas, because sometimes it just gets too big and too generic, and then it's just a thing is a thing with a relationship to each other, like many to many. So, but this kind of, when we can talk about this from a lot of dimensions, but we did not mention the intensity of dialogue and the intensity of feedback and discussion, and to some the way that we are not saying this is the way it is, it's rather this is our current misunderstanding. Do you agree? Can you help us to make this picture, this map even better? And that comes down to attitude of being inviting and not saying that I know everything, I'm going to teach you. It's rather, this is how we have been mapping it so far, please help us. And that is a massive change.
And it becomes a neutral ground as well, so instead of just having the one who's sort of shouting the loudest, or who's like very bondy with the boss to get their projects running, now you can actually start to, but why? You know, you can compare them.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'm afraid we need to wrap up.
Did you
Please
have
give them a warm
Oops,
round of applause.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and if you're interested, Cecilia has written a book about this. It came in Swedish in April, and now we are publishing it or releasing it in the mid-October with the basic of what we have been describing. And we are so interested in feedback and thoughts, so come and talk to us. Thank
Lovely.
you.